Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited to be able to host our next storyteller. Her name is Kayla Kingdon, and she is an experienced environmental policy leader, manager, and advocate. She has experience in the machinery of government and has led collaborative work programs on a wide range of environmental policy issues. She is also the CEO of WWF New Zealand. Let's please give her a huge round of applause and thank you so much for being here today.
Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi nui, he mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. Greetings from Aotearoa in Te Reo Māori, the first language of New Zealand. My name is Kayla Kingdon Bebb, and I'm the CEO of WWF New Zealand. You can probably tell from the dulcet tones of my accent that I'm not a Kiwi by birth. I was born and raised in Canada. And growing up on the west coast of British Columbia, the Pacific Ocean was ever present in my life. Many years on, my partner and I now live on the other side of the Pacific, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, on the wild south coast of Wellington, Te Whanganui Tara in Aotearoa. Across the street from us is one of New Zealand's few precious marine reserves. I loved nature for as long as I can remember, but I suppose you could say that it was my move to Aotearoa that really turned me into the environmentalist I am today. That's not just because New Zealand has such an amazing array of native wildlife, but because so many of our species are on the brink of extinction. Our wild islands are so remote that the native species and ecosystems in New Zealand have evolved for millennia in relative isolation. They are incredibly unique. Most are found nowhere else on Earth. In fact, before colonization, New Zealand was effectively a land without teeth. Our birds had no mammalian predators, and by consequence, many evolved to be flightless or to nest on the ground. Aotearoa has the highest proportion of threatened species in the world, and despite the clean green image of New Zealand that might spring to mind for some of you, 4,000 of our native species, fully a third of them, are threatened or at risk of extinction. And because so many of these creatures are found nowhere else on Earth, if we lose them here, we'll lose them forever. Our wildlife is a huge part of the fabric of our society in Aotearoa, and sadly, extinction stories are woven into our cultural landscape. When we talk about climate change at COP, we often talk about its impacts on people, about the weather extremes we'll face and the landscapes that will be ravaged, the climate disasters we're already seeing in the Pacific and around the world, about the rise in sea levels forcing us from our homes, the terrifying wildfires, the severe droughts and flooding undermining food security. But what we don't always talk about is the impacts that climate change will have and is already having on the species that we share this planet with. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, 82% of our bird species and 22% of marine mammals are threatened or at risk of extinction. Climate change is dramatically exacerbating this situation. And it's our seabirds that are living particularly close to the edge. We have more seabirds in New Zealand than anywhere else on the planet, but shockingly, 90% of them are threatened with extinction. For us, seabirds are sentinels. That means they're indicators of the health of our ocean and of our changing climate. Changes to their population, their breeding habits, and their foraging behavior all offer important insight into what's happening in our wider environment. And today I'm going to tell you about two sentinel seabirds in New Zealand that tell us a very clear story about our changing climate and about the impacts of human activity. One of these birds is right on our doorstep in Aotearoa, and another is a little harder to spot. First, the toroa. The Antipodean albatross is Aotearoa's most endangered albatross species. They are enormous. They have a wingspan of over 3 meters. There are few sights as majestic as watching an albatross soar over the ocean, and it's no wonder that so many maritime cultures have myths about them. English sailors used to see albatross as a talisman of good luck. For Polynesians and Maori, the toroa is the great navigator, a pathfinder. The Antipodean albatross is perilously close to being wiped out forever. And if something doesn't change, they will be extinct in less than 2 decades. And to help explain why this species is on the brink, I'm going to share a video with you from my mates at Live Ocean. They're an amazing charity that was founded by 2 Kiwi sailors, Peter Burling and Blake Tuke, who champion action for the ocean through sport. They're part of New Zealand's Sail GP team, and I know representatives from Sail GP have been speaking here at Extreme Hangouts as well.
There is a sentinel, a pathfinder, who watches over the oceans. He can sense when a storm is coming, smell food, hours before he sees it, and even if he does not return to land for years, he always knows where home is. The albatross, the Antipodean albatross, one of 22 species of this amazing bird. They live here, on these tiny islands, the most southeastern part of Aotearoa, New Zealand. For years, where they travelled was a mystery to us, but now, with GPS tracking, we know they travel incredible distances, ranging wide across the oceans, 170,000 kilometres in one-track journey. That's almost halfway to the moon, on wings 3 meters wide, gliding, surfing the wind. No other bird travels the seas with such grace. Nothing.
The Southern Ocean is brutal. It's not hard to feel insignificant when you're down there, but when you see an albatross, you're just in awe of how easy they make it look. They'll get you home.
Like us, the wind and sea are their elements. It's rare to see an albatross on the mainland. They are out here, in their space. And here, they are the masters, and we are the amateurs.
For Polynesians and Māori, the albatross, the toroa, is the great navigator, the one we aspired to be. They've been by our side for centuries as we voyaged right across the Pacific.
For these birds, the Antipodes Islands are home. This is where, when they're around 16 years old, a pair will raise their first chick. A young one so big, it needs to stay on the nest for a year, building its strength, being fed by its devoted parents, who will travel for days, sometimes weeks, to find food and return. This father can smell squid, but what he doesn't know, what he'll never know, is that inside the squid is a big, sharp hook. He'll drown, dragged under by the long line that this vessel sets for tuna and swordfish, killed doing what any parent would do, feeding their family. The population of Antipodean albatross is in terrible danger. We've lost 60% of them since 2005. In 2 decades, they could be extinct. After 1 million years of evolution, they are now competing with our hunger, and they're losing.
But it doesn't have to be this way.
This is a problem we created, and one we can solve.
Wake up! We're responsible, not just for ourselves, but for every part of the natural world. Kaitiakitanga. Even for the creatures we cannot see, the ones who live out there on the ocean in their element.
If we insist that the world's fishing fleets, including our own, use albatross-safe techniques, then together we will stop the greatest threat to the Antipodean albatross. And this taonga, the sentinel, will continue to watch over our seas, guiding us home. Share this, tell everyone. Go to liveocean.com to find out how you can help.
As you've just seen, while they spend most of their lives at sea, the Antipodean albatross nest on the remote and uninhabited Antipodes Island, about 800 kilometers southeast of New Zealand. These rugged islands in the roaring 40s are one of the few remaining untouched places on this planet. Few people have visited them other than a handful of intrepid scientists and shipwrecked sailors, and fortuitously also me. In one of the most remote places on Earth, I saw parakeets and penguins that don't exist anywhere else. I saw the tiny storm petrel and the New Zealand snipe, a bird that's been extinct for 1,000 years on the mainland. And I saw the Antipodean albatross. Getting to see these magnificent birds in the flesh is an incredible privilege, but it's one that future generations may not have. And as you heard from Live Ocean, in a little more than a decade, we have lost 2/3 of their population. About 2,300 die each year as a result of being killed in commercial fisheries. Every death puts this wide-ranging and slow-breeding species at risk of extinction, worsening the significant and dramatic population decline that has been happening since 2004. Compounding the issue is that the majority of birds being killed are female. In the Antipodes, there are now 3 males for every female albatross. And the birds typically mate for life. But year after year, our scientists are seeing lone male albatrosses arrive at their colony to wait for a nest for their partner who won't return. It's truly tragic. So what happened? Why are these sentinel birds dying at such a rate? What has happened is a terrible and unlucky combination of climate change and unsustainable fishing practices. Overfishing and warming seas arising as a result of climate change have reduced the availability of the prey that toroa eat. They need to fly further and longer to forage. And for female toroa, who are smaller than the males and much lighter, this change has driven them north, directly into areas where they're most likely to encounter longline fishing vessels fishing for tuna on the high seas. The accidental bycatch of albatross and other seabirds can be stopped. There are a number of measures that fishing boats can take to significantly reduce bycatch, but they're not being widely used. And while bycatch is the proximate cause that we can address, the ultimate cause of this issue is climate change, for so significantly altering the foraging patterns of these birds in the first place. We know that climate change and nature loss are 2 sides of the same coin, and to save our most precious species from extinction, we need to address both. We know that we need to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, but even at this level, we're seeing the ocean warm and acidified with devastating effects on marine species. We also need to be doing everything we can in this context to halt human-induced extinctions. And in the case of the toroa, the albatross, this means mandating seabird-friendly fishing techniques. And that brings me to the other sentinel species I want to talk to you about tonight, and which is telling us about the impacts of climate change. The world's smallest penguin, the korora, the little blue penguin. Just over 20 years ago, when I was very young, there was an oil spill named near Phillip Island, just off of Australia's south coast and home to little blue penguins. A patch of oil the size of a thumbnail can kill a little blue penguin. Oiled penguins often die from exposure and starvation. The oil separates and mats under their feathers, allowing water to get in, which makes a penguin very cold, heavy, and unable to forage for food. Or they try and preen themselves to get clean and ingest toxic oil in the process. In response to the Phillip Island oil spill, a local wildlife charity 20 years ago began a mass drive to knit woolen jumpers for the penguins that were impacted. These tiny woolen jumpers served as a barrier to stop the penguins from cleaning the toxic oil off their feathers and were worn temporarily until they could be taken to a rescue center to be cleaned. Volunteers around our planet made thousands of tiny little jumpers for these penguins. And this all took place when I was very young, as I said, but it's one of the first memories I have of the vital role that people can play in protecting wildlife, including from the actions that we've taken that have harmed them in the first place. While many of us will never have the privilege of seeing an Antipodean albatross, korora can be found throughout New Zealand and in other countries. Many of them live close to urban centers, and the colony that breed in the Te Putaranga Marine Reserve near my house can be seen all over Wellington, New Zealand's capital city. And there are also sentinel species whose foraging patterns tell us about the impacts of our changing climate. That's because rising sea temperatures make their food supply more sparse and drive the fish they feed on into deeper waters. Little blue penguins, the world's tiniest penguin, just don't have sufficient body mass they need to be able to catch prey at such a distance or depth. So they and their chicks starve. Marine heat waves are linked to mass mortality events where thousands of korora die. Far from hidden, far from the remote Antipodean islands, their little emaciated bodies wash up in our beaches in terrifying numbers. It's a brutal visual reminder that climate change is here, it's here now, and it's deadly. Korora mass mortality events used to happen about once a decade. Year on year, they're happening much more frequently now. And like the Antipodean albatross, humans are also directly harming these creatures. The key threats to them include habitat loss through development, overfishing, pollution of the marine environment, and introduced predators like dogs and cats. These are all pressures we can do something about. But while human activity is causing their decline, up and down the country, our rescue centers and dedicated teams of volunteers spend days and nights trying to rehabilitate the little chicks that wash up on our beaches, struggling to live. They painstakingly prepare anchovy smoothies, which I can tell you are extremely gross, and they hand feed these rescue chicks until they're strong enough to survive on their own. It takes weeks. Just as people around the world were prepared to knit thousands of tiny woolen jumpers for penguins affected by oil spills, people in New Zealand are also prepared to dedicate hours of their time to protecting these creatures. And just as the legions of knitters 20 years ago inspired me then, the volunteers I meet and support today inspire me now. Humans are responsible for the threats to our wildlife, including through our changing climate, but we also have the power to remedy these problems simply by changing our behaviors. And whether they're close to home or they're far away on remote, uninhabited islands, our sentinel species are speaking to us. They are telling us that our activities are putting them at risk. They're telling us that we need to double down on climate action and that we must take urgent and transformative action to halt and reverse the loss of nature. If we don't address both crises together now, we will lose countless of these species to extinction. These sentinel species are telling us what to do, Every country around the world has them, whether they're a seabird, a plant, an insect, or a mammal. We need to listen to them. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tatou katoa.